Known as the Apostle to the Indies, a term which embraced largely what was the rest of the world, Francis Xavier was an extraordinary member of that inner circle of Jesuits and much beloved by Ignatius of Loyola. It was his great desire, and he was encouraged in this by Loyola, to leave Europe and go to Asia. And perhaps his greatest desire was to go to China, a story that we will follow later with Matteo Ricci. In 1541, Xavier left Lisbon under the encouragement of John III and sailed with the Portuguese round to what is now Mozambique and then to Goa, here on the western coast of India. His trips would eventually take him through Malacca and up to Japan and into what is now Indonesia. He died having not reached China as he had most hoped, or on the island just off of China, in September 1552. Who was this extraordinary figure? And what did he do in terms of missionary work? I would say that his role was absolutely crucial, though in many ways it ended in disappointment. He left Lisbon and went to Goa with the Portuguese traders. Goa was a center of commercial activity, which had been colonized by the Portuguese and used for trade with the rest of Asia. Mass numbers of people had already begun to convert to Christianity. But when Xavier arrived, in a flush of enthusiasm, he found the situation was deeply problematic. The Portuguese masters, the Portuguese traders, right down to the Portuguese merchants and sailors, had an extraordinarily abusive relationship towards the locals. They treated them appallingly. And not only that, their own behavior, as Xavier would say on numerous occasions, was anything but Christian. Xavier found himself in a challenging position in which he began his work of conversion and work of taking the faith to these people who had been so badly treated. Yet at the beginning, there seemed to be grounds for hope. Large numbers of locals were baptized and seemed to embrace the faith. But that didn't last long, for although working between Goa and what's now Sri Lanka, Xavier was able to build over 40 churches. Nevertheless, what was soon discovered by himself and the Jesuits was that those who had been baptized had at best only appropriated elements of Christianity. What they had really done, was most likely, as incorporated the new faith into their traditional beliefs. And so this was an extraordinarily important moment in the development of Jesuit missionary work, because they realized that mass baptisms were not necessarily highly effective. They did not mean, of course, mass conversions to Christianity, and that the path that they had chosen would be much harder than anticipated. Nevertheless, Xavier was determined that he would move further east. And in 1549, he started to make his way to go away towards Japan, and where he would arrive and stay between 1549 and 1551. The story of Xavier's stay in Japan is fascinating. The Japanese were deeply suspicious of Christian intervention in their land. And here we see a screen representation of Jesuits already in the court culture of Japan, dressed in traditional Jesuit garb. Xavier found that as he moved along the coast, he was not particularly welcome. But what he was able to do was to find local connections, which enabled him to come ashore and help to establish a series of communities. The Japanese rulers often declared that conversion to Christianity was illegal. They, like the Chinese later with Matteo Ricci, did not feel that in any way they had anything to gain from these Westerners, these foreigners. They had a highly sophisticated culture that did not require these Jesuit missionaries. Xavier then had a brilliant plan. That far from dealing with the Japanese dressed in traditional Jesuit garb, that they should identify themselves by the attire of the locals, that they should cast off their Western dress and adopt the dress of the Japanese. This was the beginning of a way of missionary work that I've already mentioned, which was of accommodation, of adapting yourselves to the culture in which you found yourself having arrived. Not to try and impose from outside, and this would involve also learning the language, something Xavier never did. He was not a particularly gifted linguist. Nevertheless, those who went with him began to learn Japanese, to learn Japanese culture. But in many ways, Xavier's heart remained with going to China. And his hope was that he would arrive in China and begin missionary work. And this, in 1552, he goes to the island of Shanguan and remains there until he dies on the beach in 1552 of a terrible fever. His body, which was said to have not corrupted, was taken first back to be buried in Malacca and then finally returned to Goa in 1552. There he is buried in an extraordinary tomb. The travels and experiences of Francis Xavier, who became the patron saint of Jesuit missionary work abroad, inspired large numbers of young men back in Europe. Xavier's letters to Loyola are full of the details of the work that was done, the successes and the great disappointments. What Jesuits were required to do was to keep a journal. In those journals, they recorded everything. The details of their travels, the people they met, what they saw, even if they didn't really understand what it was. But these journals became remarkable accounts of the cultures that they encountered and give us extraordinary insight into the world of the 16th century missions as the Jesuits begin to have contact with cultures and languages they could only hope to begin to understand and understood only very little of. Yet as educated figures, they were and great observers of the people and cultures that they saw. They have left us something invaluable. That material poured back into Europe, creating a vast body of literature and information. The role of the Jesuits in expanding European knowledge of the rest of the world was central and crucial. Xavier played a significant role in this, not only for what he did, and it ended in disappointment not getting to China, but because he inspired generations. And his representation in paintings, such as this one, as this great figure who goes to the peoples of the world, to the peoples of the Indies broadly conceived, ensured his fame and ensured the further successes and work of the Jesuits abroad.